Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video. And in today's video, following my previous upload, which was dedicated to the humble Swiss Army knife, I showcased a variety of pieces, including a new acquisition, or relatively new acquisition, and I figured, well, it should receive its own separate video, and that's what we will be doing here today. So this is the Victorinox Cadet, and it's quite the unique little piece, seeing that it's an 84mm knife, so think recruit, small tinker, sportsman, and the like, but it's in the Alox handles, and these particular ones are in the black configuration, which is not that common. But without further ado, take a bit of a look at the knife itself. This, of course, was the box it came in, which included the signature dent, which is often found on knives shipped via Amazon. This was purchased from Amazon.ca. Free shipping, of course, but the knife itself was a little bit more pricey than sort of your standard Victorinox 84mm knife, which usually cost around the $40 Canadian price range. This was around $60, so you are paying a bit extra for the handle, but this is, of course, the Cadet Black Alox, and if you want the model number, there you are. So, the Cadet. Well, first of all, what originally drew me to this knife was how thin it is compared to most other double springed or double layered, depending on which term you prefer, Swiss Army knives. And just for comparison, probably the closest knife to the Cadet is even similar in name, the Recruit. Now the Recruit here is in the Salutations handle option. This one's in red. And you can see both have two springs, but the Salutations is significantly thicker than the Alox. So even though they are roughly identical in terms of their interior thickness, you can see that the addition of the Salutations and the extra aluminum liner does add a little bit to the knife overall, giving the Cadet a much more streamlined and elegant appearance overall. Of course, the handles here are their stamped aluminum. They usually come in a plain silver color, like this 93mm Farmer. The Farmer is very different, seeing that, first of all, it's a lot thicker, has more tools crammed in, including the wood saw. It also has thicker springs, which lead to a bit of a stiffer pull on the blade and thicker blade stock. But this is the standard configuration for the Cadet, with the red shield and silver handles. I went with the black because I don't actually have an Alox knife in any color besides silver, so this one quite interested me. It's a little bit harder to find, but if you look around you can find the alternative colors on the Alox. I believe they have a green, they might have a blue, but I went with the black here. Very nice color, and I quite like the appearance of the shield. Have your aluminum rivets or pins, which you can feel, of course. Yeah, we have 9 functions on this knife, of course including the key ring, starting with the signature can opener and small flathead. Of course, these are very shiny with their standard mirror/tumbled polish. No one can really ever decide what it is, but I quite like it. has a nice sheen. And you can see, of course, the interior is also polished. Our first two functions, followed by the next three. We have a large flathead, as well as the standard bottle opener and wire stripper. Wipe this off again. And these are found on virtually every traditional Swiss Army knife that is larger than the 74mm variety. There are exceptions, of course, but these are staples for anyone who has owned a Victorinox. This has the half stop as well. Very secure tension. There is a single blade with something that is quite interesting. This has the Officier Suisse stamp, which is usually reserved for the Salutations variety of knife, and in typical fashion also the models with tools on both sides. This is the Tinker, and you can see the same stamp right here. But this stamp is not placed on the Alox knives, seeing that they originally were based off of the Swiss soldier's knife, whereas the Salutations variety with the tools on the reverse are designed off of the officer's knife. Also, this is a 91mm knife, whereas the Alox is 93. Very slightly larger and with the thicker blade. But as you can see, the Farmer does not have the stamp, but oddly, the Cadet does. And if I had to figure, the reason for that is they're just using the same blade that they would put on something like the Recruit, which is the exact same size, being an 84mm pattern. And so they're probably just using the same blade for both knives. But regardless, you have that stamp there, the standard polished Victorinox steel blade. Also the Victorinox Swiss-made stainless. Of course, this has the standard fit and finish of a Victorinox knife. Very, very nice. There is no blade play to be found. The tension on the spring is quite nice. Locks into place with authority. And all of the tools are very neatly aligned. It's a very compact knife. And what really differentiates this from the likes of the Recruit, aside from the handle, of course, would be a nail file and pick, as opposed to, on the Recruit, just a second smaller pen blade. And I have stewed over which is the better implement. I personally quite like having a second blade, as the pen blades on my knives get usually equal, if not slightly more use than the main blade. But at the same time, having the nail file can be quite useful, and seeing that this is more of a catered gentleman's knife among Victorinox pieces, I can see the purpose for this, as the nail file is usually included on something like the 58mm Classic, or, again, my favorite, the 74mm Executive. So, it's an interesting implement. Certainly, there is some utility to be gained in having the pick as well. But whether you would prefer the secondary blade, I think that's entirely up to the individual's desire for what they're looking for in the knife, although it would be nice if the Recruit was available in the same Alox material, as I know some much prefer the more streamlined profile and the ease of carry that comes from these slimmer knives. So that is one unfortunate fact. If you want the second blade, but also you want a smaller knife overall, you are going to be in a bit of a pickle. That is, unless you are willing to forego the screwdrivers and bottle and can opener, because then, if you're lucky, you could pick one of these up, the Excelsior, which is the slimmest of all Victorinox knives in my collection, featuring just a single spring and on it 2 blades, one large and one small. And this one has been freshly oiled. But the Excelsior is also featured in smooth Alox, which is quite rare nowadays. I'm fairly certain this has been largely discontinued, but you can still find the textured Alox as seen on the Cadet or the Farmer. And these are still being readily made. As for the smooth ones, I am not so certain about that. They have become quite uncommon. But a very nice knife that I would still highly, highly recommend if you're just looking for a streamlined and elegant little pen knife, but at the same time you still want a Victorinox. So the Cadet as a whole, I haven't carried it nearly enough to give a thorough review of it, and in typical fashion of most of my videos, I am not one who uses knives consistently day in, day out to the extent where I can give a full hard use review. But in terms of the craftsmanship, it's absolutely excellent. There's nothing to be found wrong with it. It's a well-built knife. Has a little spot here for engraving, as is standard on the Alox models. It feels very nice in the hand. It's very lightweight, of course very thin. And I could see this being quite the nice knife to just carry around the house if you want to have a knife with you and aren't looking for a particular set of tools, or a knife if you're the type to carry a second larger knife. This could be a nice backup, if you will. But it's a very nice knife. Good size, good weight. It is UK legal, as the blade is under 3 inches in length. So that will be quite helpful if any of my UK viewers are interested. But overall, I am quite fond of the Cadet. I quite like the novelty of having an Alox knife in a color other than just the sort of plain silver. But it's a very nice knife, and one of the biggest shocks for me is that it's actually thinner even than the Wader, which is one of the highly regarded Swiss Army knives of the 84 range, seeing that it only has 1 spring. And even despite that, having 2 springs, you can see the Cadet still manages to be a little bit thinner. Of course, in the process, though, you are sacrificing the utility of the tweezers and toothpick, which I, for one, very much enjoy having on my Swiss Army knives. So I think if I were to carry this consistently and make it a bit of a staple for my everyday kit, I would definitely bring something like this little classic along with it, just to have the addition of those scale tools, and plus you also have the scissors to boot. So it's a nice recommended little carry, and obviously neither knife is going to take up that much room. But all in all, the Cadet, there isn't too much to say about it. It's a very simple configuration: bottle opener, can opener, blade, and nail file. It's really, I wouldn't say that specialized of a knife. Some Victorinox knives cater to a specific use. This one doesn't really have that. It's just a very nice, simple, urban everyday knife without any real excess bulk. It's still maintaining a slimmer profile than a single blade traditional knife, so there is the advantage there. But if you're looking for a more gentlemanly knife and perhaps weren't able to get a hold of something like the Executive or the Excelsior, then this is a very reliable choice. So if you're interested, I found this one on Amazon. I don't know if they're currently still in stock, but they can be found quite readily. They're still in production. The other colors in the Alox are also available as far as I know. So if you're interested, go give this one a look. It's very pleasant to carry, fits in most pockets, and is just a great, simple little knife that doesn't really lean too far into any one specialization. So I quite like it. Thank you very much for watching, and this has been the Victorinox Cadet, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.